This is episode 52 of the Women in Depth podcast. The information found in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hi, and welcome back to the podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Lourdes Viado. I'm very excited to share today's conversation with you. I had the privilege of speaking with Lisa Marchiano about how parenting reveals our shadow, the qualities we least like in ourselves, and how these shadow qualities can be revealed by looking beneath the surface at our interactions with our children. As a mom, I found this conversation incredibly helpful, and I know that it's going to resonate with many of you. Lisa Marchiano is a licensed clinical social worker and certified Jungian Analyst in private practice in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. She received her MSW from New York University and completed analytic training at the Interregional Society of Jungian Analysts. Lisa is on the faculty of the Philadelphia Jung Institute, and her writings have appeared in the journal Psychological Perspectives and in Psyched magazine. She blogs on parenting for Psych Central at Big Picture Parenting and on Jungian topics at www.thejungsoul.com. Lisa is also a mom. She's currently building an online community where mothers can explore the profound changes that motherhood brings. You can check out her community at www.motherhoodtransformation.com. I also want to mention that in today's conversation, Lisa does share some client information, and I want to emphasize that this information has been shared with the permission of the client and that any identifiers have been changed to protect the client's identity. Hi, Lisa, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi.
I'm very excited about this conversation because I feel like parenting is just chock full of, I guess you could call them opportunities or challenges or all sorts of situations where we as parents find ourselves, responding or interacting in a way that we struggle with, or we feel like I should be doing something differently. I know as a mom, I find myself getting pulled into these dilemmas all the time. And so when I saw your blog post on Psych Central on how parenting can bring out our shadow qualities, I felt like this was such a rich topic and so helpful potentially for parents. So thank you. Thank you so much for writing this article and for coming on the podcast.
Sure. It's definitely been an interest of mine for a long time, so I'm happy to share it.
Can you share a little bit more about that? Like, how did this become your interest, and what drew you into this?
Mm-hmm. Well, so let's see. I became a mom, somewhat later. I was in my mid-30s, and I was also, shortly after my daughter arrived, I started training to become a Jungian analyst, actually. So I pretty quickly had an infant. My son came a little bit after that. So I had a toddler and an infant, and I was in Jungian training. And I had always kind of thought that I think part of the reason it took me a while to have kids is I think I sort of unconsciously thought that, that motherhood was somehow going to limit what you could do professionally, but even just sort of personally. It seemed like the women I knew who had kids, I would look at them and I think, wow, their whole the realm of what matters to them has sort of shrunk to just this little world around their kids, So I think I unconsciously was sort of expecting it to be, well, sort of like a diminishment, honestly. And of course, I love my kids like crazy, and a lot of it was really great, but a lot of it was really hard too. And I remember, I don't know, my son was 4 months old or something, and my daughter was 2, and that's rough.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, lots of people go through it, but it's hard. So I was struggling through some day doing something mundane, and I thought, geez, this is just so hard. And then I thought, yeah, but I think I'm really growing and changing and sort of meeting new parts of myself as a result. And I was like, wow, that's such an interesting idea. And so I, came home and I got on the internet to see, who had written about this. And of course, I was sort of hoping for a Jungian take on it. And there was nothing. So I started thinking, well, maybe I should sort of, gestate this. And it did wind up being my my thesis in analytic training. And I am currently working on a book on the topic. But a big part of it is the many ways that taking care of kids can sort of introduce you to, these parts of yourself you would rather not know about. And I'll just sort of finish this part up by just saying there's this great quote by the novelist Faye Weldon. And what she says is something like, the best part about not having children must be that you can go on thinking that you're a good person.
Oh my gosh, that's powerful. I'm sorry, I just had to laugh because it's like, wow, it's so powerful because first you're saying, wow, is she really saying that out loud? That's almost like a shadow. It's almost like a shadow quote, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Wow. So for our listeners who may not be, familiar with some of the terms that we'll be using, can you speak about what the shadow is? And I know that's a big one too.
No, but you're right. That's important, and it is doable. Hopefully, let's see. So, of course, Carl Jung came up with a whole bunch of terminology that has kind of entered the language, like extroversion and introvert and archetype, and I believe complex may have been one of the terms that he originated as well. But the shadow was one of his big ideas, and essentially he said something like, the shadow is all that we do not wish to be. So he said that, as we are growing up, we learn that certain aspects of ourselves are less acceptable than others. And examples might be aggression, selfishness, boastfulness, sexuality. We learn this from our parents, and we also learn it from teachers and the culture in general. And so we just sort of kind of stuff that down there. So by the time we become adults, we've got this nice collection of these traits and qualities that we're not totally in touch with. And sometimes we kind of know they're there, but we just don't really want to think about it. We don't like to be reminded. And sometimes we're pretty split off from it, and we're like, oh no, I couldn't possibly imagine, being that way. Jim Hollis likes to say, if you want to know your shadow, ask your spouse, which I think is a funny idea. But another way to think about your shadow is, sometimes I explain it like, think about somebody who drives you nuts. Like maybe other people also kind of feel irritated by this person, but you have a big reaction. This person really gets under your skin, right? And then ask yourself, what's the most annoying thing about that person? And then when you name that thing, you likely will name a quality that is in shadow for you, something that you were not allowed to be. And so now it really irritates you.
So when it comes to parenting and shadow, what are some ways that just, I guess, in the day-to-day routine that maybe, parents don't realize that, okay, right now this is a shadow moment that's happening? Like, how can you begin to, what comes to mind for me as I was just listening to you right now is sometimes when I'm trying to get my son's attention and I've told him like 3 or 4 times and he's selectively choosing to not respond to me. And I get so frustrated with that, and I was thinking about that as far as I wonder if that's a part of me that I feel like I can't tune people out, like I have to respond to them. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a great thought. I mean, obviously, it's a little bit different because let's face it, kids are irritating probably every single day. our children does. And not necessarily every time that we feel short-tempered with our children might it be a shadow moment, but I guess it's good to be curious about it, especially if it has a sort of nagging quality to it. I mean, here's one example that I remember for myself is I was actually preparing for the big exams that are sort of the capstone to the first part of analytic training. They're called the propaedoicum, because why not use a multisyllabic Latin word for exam? And it's very challenging. It was very stressful, and I was preparing for them, and I was I think I was kind of worried that I wasn't going to do well. And I was going somewhere with my daughter that day, and we went outside. It was like a sort of a warmish day or something. We got in in the middle of winter, and there was a little kid riding a bike down the sidewalk with a parent. And we got in the car, and I found myself kind of, my brain was sort of idling on that image, because my daughter was old enough to start riding a bike, but she hadn't done it yet. And I found myself kind of worrying, this sort of like negative chatter in my brain about my daughter, and why wasn't she picking it up quickly, and what was that about? And it sort of went on for a while before I sort of caught myself, and I thought, wait a minute, why is my mind going there? And there was a lot of feeling to it too. I sort of feel it in my body, I think anxiety about her, and was she going to be okay? Was she going to pick this up? And also maybe some irritation that she wasn't, sort of the first kid on the block to get there. And so I could feel the heat of those emotions, and notice that it was a thought that was kind of hanging around for a while that I couldn't shake. And so then I got curious about it. I thought, what is this about? And then it hit me that, in fact, what I was really worried about was myself, and if I was going to do okay on these exams, and was I falling behind my peers who were also studying, and would I do okay, and would I fall flat? So really that was a moment of sort of projecting my own shadow stuff, my feelings of inadequacy, my fear that I wasn't good enough, onto my daughter, and sort of meeting it there.
Wow, that's powerful. That's a really wonderful example of how what's going on within ourselves that we may not really be aware of consciously is showing up actually right in front of us in this person, in our child.
Mm-hmm.
So what are some ways, you've done a lot of research around this, and you work with parents in this area. What are some of the ways that you have seen parenting reveal the shadow?
Gosh, there's so many good examples of that. But so another thing, I'll give you an example, but before leading into it, I want to just mention another aspect about the shadow that I sort of started off by saying that these are things that we've had to kind of repudiate or cut ourselves off from. But Jung said once that 99% of the shadow is pure gold. And what he meant by that is often those parts of ourselves that we've cut ourselves off from have tremendous energy in them, and they can be a source of renewal, especially in midlife. So, yes, it's things like, okay, I shouldn't, I don't know, be aggressive or violent or, inappropriately sexual or something like that. But there's also things that, for example, in my family, it was just a cardinal sin to be boastful. You had to always be very humble no matter what. And if you got a little braggy, you got the hairy eyeball really quick from one of my parents. Okay. So that was very much a shadow quality for me. But of course, at some point in my life, that wound up being something that I needed to get back in touch with, and it could be really renewing. It could be like rediscovering a part of myself that I hadn't gotten to know before. And for me, and then I'll give you an example from my practice as well. But for me, part of that came from seeing my son, actually, who's he's very confident. He always has been. He has no problem putting himself out there And, it's sort of, it used to make me kind of cringe a little bit to
Yeah.
see it, because like, no, you're not supposed to do that. No. But then I think it showed up for me with dreams with him and that kind of thing. And it wound up being a way that I could meet that part of myself with more acceptance. And so then that became a growth experience for me. So now let me give you a sort of related example from someone in my practice. So this is a woman who had grown children when she started working with me, and she grew up with a pretty abusive mother, and she was always who criticized her constantly. Let's just say that. Okay, so she was criticized constantly and was never allowed to feel good about herself, and wasn't allowed to put herself out there or be confident or consider herself attractive or any of those qualities. So let's see, I will call her Celine. So Celine had two children, Richard and Katie, and at this point, when the story begins, they're both adults. But when she was raising them, Richard was very quiet and compliant, a lot like Celine. But Katie was, like the wild child. She was noisy. She got in trouble a lot. She was stubborn. She was opinionated. And, Celine was a really great mom who sometimes found this behavior of Katie's like absolutely bewildering and also kind of challenging. But she supported Katie, and Katie sort of entered adulthood, just as feisty as ever. Okay. So when I began working with Celine, she was going through an important growth process where she was connecting with these qualities that she had been forced to repudiate when she was a child because of her mother's criticisms, right? And this was imaged for us in a dream of her daughter. Okay, so here's the dream. So Celine is on like a grassy lawn, and there are tables set up with all kinds of food, like buffet tables. And there's lots of people milling around with plates, and they're walking up to the tables and they're getting the food. But Celine gets close to the table, but doesn't feel, she can't get close enough to get the food. She can't push through the crowd and get the food. So she's got an empty plate. Okay. At that moment, these young, athletic, these young people parachute from the sky, and they land on the ground, and they're part of some special force, like the FBI or something. They're trained. They're highly specialized operatives who can do these amazing things. And her daughter, Katie, is one of them. So they do all these special things, and then they begin kind of processing as if it's a graduation. And they're very impressive, and they sort of they have this kind of attitude of quiet pride as they walk past. And Katie walks past Celine in the dream and looks at her, and Celine realizes that she's looking right into her own face. She's startled by that, and the dream ends and she wakes up.
Wow. Powerful.
So here she was really sort of connecting with this energy that she had as a child. She had been feisty until her mother sort of quashed that. And then that had been a shadow quality for her, that sort of just feistiness that it hadn't been allowed to come out, but here she was getting back in touch with it, and it shows up in this way, kind of imaged through her daughter.
Wow, that's it's really just the imagery of the dream and the emotions that it evoked. It's really powerful how this showed up for your client. For those who maybe are not, working with their dreams and are not really sure how they can begin to know if what they are experiencing is shadow. What are some of the ways that you can begin to work with shadow?
Mm-hmm. Well, in some sense, I mean, I think it sort of shows up all the time, and in the first example that I gave earlier, it might be that I would say any time that you have a reaction to something that seems a little hot, that seems a little outsized, like it bothers you more than you think it should somehow, that it's that other, your spouse has moved on and isn't bothered, but you're still obsessing a little bit over it. I mean, sometimes there's other reasons for it. I don't want to say that there's always a shadow quality. Sometimes you might have an intuition that something's really wrong, and that's why it's kind of nagging at you. But if you feel like a sense of discomfort, like, oh, you don't even want to admit that you're feeling that way, because that's just like a terrible way to feel, that's probably a shadow element that's kind of sneaking in. And again, I think the response is to get curious about it. There's another way that shadow kind of comes into parenting, and in some ways this is sort of the most obvious, and relates to that Faye Weldon quote that I shared earlier, and that is that we are likely to be more awful in our behavior towards our children than we have ever been to anyone, probably since we reached adulthood.
Wow.
So, yeah. I mean, it's, none of us want that to be true, right? We love our kids, but my guess is that if you asked any parent, who have you treated the absolute worst within the past year?
Oh my God.
Most of us would say, well, yeah, that would be my kid. The time I just completely, lost it on them, and I was completely irrational, and I was screaming, and oh my God, I can't believe I did that. But, parenting provokes really strong feelings.
It does.
And who makes this point? Someone makes the point that, hate. So love is filled with what Jung called eros, which just means like a lot of energy that connects us, right? That's really what love is. It's sort of psychic energy that connects us. And you know what? Hate is just the other side of it. I mean, hate is filled with energy that connects. And the people that we get really angry at are the people that we love, for the most part, in our daily lives. I remember my son used to say, I hate you. And I would say, well, right now I hate you too. So we're going to feel these really dark things that we don't feel, with our colleagues at work. We just don't feel that level of rage side of our family relationships. And we probably don't usually feel them with our spouse.
Why do you think it is that our children can provoke such strong reactions within us?
Well, there are so many reasons for that. I mean, I think first of all, it's because we love them so much and we feel so much responsibility, and and it can feel very high stakes.
Yeah.
And our children have not learned how. I mean, one of the things that hopefully what happens in an office environment is everyone is sort of in their persona. And so we're all kind of playing by societal rules when we interact, at least hopefully most of the time. Our children are not interested in being, polite and well-behaved and reasonable with us. When they're little, they don't have any idea how to do that, right? A toddler doesn't understand, what's sort of appropriate for polite company. They just are always in their authentic feeling state, and we kind of just have to deal with that. And, with teenagers, they can often sort of, be very well behaved for people outside the house, but they need to push against us. So in some sense, it is the child's job to, we're there for them to push against, really. So push they will. And yes, of course, it provokes very strong feelings. And then I think also, we see our own unresolved psychic conflicts being played out in the lives of our children. So that can be, a lot of sort of unconscious stuff can get stirred up.
Just like in that example you gave of your client with the dream, where what was stirred in her was her own disconnection or the loss of connection to that feisty part of herself.
Yes.
In your article, you shared a fairy tale that really helped to explicate this whole thing with our parenting, evoking our shadow. Would you be able to share that?
Yes, that was Tatterhood, was it not?
Yes, it was.
So Tatterhood is a Norwegian fairy tale, and it's such a wonderful, wonderful story. So the setup is that there is a queen who is childless, and she very, very much wants children. And so she consults with a beggar woman who tells her that she must wash herself in, I think it's 2 pails of water. And then she has to dump the dirty water underneath the bed. And in the morning, there will be 2 flowers growing underneath the bed. One will be beautiful and bright and fair, and the other one will be, black and it's awful stench. And the beggar woman says, now, whatever you do, don't eat the black flower. Right. So, and of course, in a fairy tale, whenever anyone tells someone not to do something, that certainly is the next thing that's going to happen. And
right.
there's no difference here. So sure enough, the queen wakes up in the morning and she sees these 2 flowers and she eats the first one, the white one, and it's so good. It tastes so good. And she just thinks, well, really, what harm can be done if I eat the black flower? So she does. And sure enough, 9 months later, she's taken to bed. And the first child that pops out is a girl who is holding a wooden spoon in her hand and riding around on a goat. And she immediately yells out, "Mama!" And the queen says, "If I'm your mama, God help me to mend my ways." And Tatterhood says, "Well, don't worry, one is coming after me who's much fairer." And so there's a second child born, and she's, beautiful and perfect, and the queen is very happy with her. But, Tatterhood always rides around on her goat. She grows up, and she wears this cloak that has a hood on it, and it's all in tatters, and that's where her name comes from. But the other daughter is just a perfect princess. And the queen is so ashamed of Tatterhood that she really wants to lock her away, but she cannot keep her separated from her fair sister. The twins always go everywhere together. So at some point when the girls are older, there's all this ruckus on Christmas Eve, and Tatterhood says, "Mother, what is going on?" And the queen says, "Oh, it's nothing. Don't mind that." But Tatterhood won't let her get away with that and insists on being told the truth. And the queen admits that there's a pack of trolls and witches who have come to celebrate Christmas. So immediately, Tatterhood knows what to do. So she tells everyone to get inside and lock all the doors and not open any of them, even one little bit. And then she goes off to chase the trolls and the witches away. Now, unfortunately, one of the nursemaids opens a door a little bit, and Tatterhood's fair sister peeks out just a bit to see what's going on. And the second she does that, a witch comes along and pops off her head and replaces it with a head of a calf. So Tatterhood chases everyone off and comes back and sees what's happened to her sister, and she just says, "Well, now look what you've done. All right, I guess I can fix this." So the next part of the story involves the 2 girls sailing away, and Tatterhood is able to restore her sister. And then at the end of the tale, they meet 2 brothers, and who are, of course, both princes. And one of them is able to see Tatterhood as she really is, which, of course, is she is a great beauty. And the sisters are both married at the end of the tale. But the sort of first half of the tale is sort of most immediately instructive, I think. I mean, first of all, whenever there's a doubling of something and there's sort of a light one and a dark one in a fairy tale or a movie or a story, the sort of notion of the doppelganger, often that's a shadow story. So, and kind of famous literary examples would be Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. There's a wonderful Joseph Campbell short story called The Secret Sharer, which is a wonderful illustration of shadow dynamics. But in any case, so here we have a light flower and a dark flower. And the good news here is that the queen is actually open to her shadow material. And by the way, it's significant that it's dirty wash water that gives rise to the flowers. You know, it's like you can't create something new in the psyche without kind of getting a little bit dirty. You know, the shadow is where the rich, good stuff is. In the dirty wash water, that's where the new thing is going to come from. I mean, the queen is sterile in the beginning of the story, and sterility often comes from not being in good contact with our shadow material because it's too nice. It's been sterilized. The kind of public persona that we display to the world. It's useful. It's not a bad thing, but it doesn't have the raw authenticity that shadow stuff does. So she's got to take her dirt and put it under the bed, and then these flowers arise. And like I said, we know she's sort of secretly open to the shadow, because she eats it. She eats the black flower. And it's really interesting that that the two sisters can't be separated because I think that's really how it is in the psyche. You don't get the pretty bright thing without also getting the sort of the kind of rough, unacceptable, dirty thing. Life proceeds in pairs of opposites. That's a quote from Jung. Where one thing is, there's always the other thing. That's how it is. One thing comes into being, and its opposite will always get constellated as well. The part where Tatterhood chases away the goblins and the witches, the truth is that it's the shadowy part of ourselves that knows how to do life's dirty work. And we see that in that dream that I mentioned before too, because the FBI, they do some sort of bad stuff sometimes. But you have to do that. You have to be able to sort of get your hands dirty in life to deal with the witches and trolls.
It's just all interconnected. You're not able to have the pure without the dirty, the dark without the light. And,
right.
This dream just really illustrates what you said at the beginning about the shadow qualities. It's what we don't want to see or know about ourselves, but also there is a richness, a treasure for us also in that same place.
Absolutely.
So, Lisa, for those who are listening and this is resonating with them and they're wanting to begin to integrate more of their shadow into their consciousness and to work with this, what are some good first steps for just beginning this process?
Well, I think always a good first step is to become curious. Curiosity is such an important attitude when we're doing any kind of psychological work. And I'm talking specifically about curiosity about ourselves. I think that most of us, or many of us, we tend to really judge our process, and we especially tend to judge and want to shut down feelings that come up that feel shadowy. And that just makes it worse. Then we're sort of suffering over our suffering because we're upset or angry at ourselves for feeling certain things. And so, I would invite listeners to, when you feel something uncomfortable, take a minute and get curious. Shift your attitude into one of curiosity. The thing is, you can't actually be curious and judgmental at the same time. They're pretty mutually exclusive attitudes. And if you can get curious about something, it sort of opens things up a little bit, and it kind of increases the ways that we can think about things. And then we're not so worried about, having done something wrong. I mean, one of the things about parenting is, God, you're just always worried you're doing it wrong. And I'm sure that's always been the case, but there is something about, this sort of, what do people call it, the mommy Olympics?
Yeah.
Where we just get so much advice from so many different quarters about, whether it's our own mother, our mother-in-law, or, our friends, or the playgroup, or, writing on the internet, or, magazines or whatever. There's so many injunctions about how to do things that you can really just drive yourself nuts, just, wanting to do it right. And so, and by the way, so much of the advice is contradictory.
It is.
Good luck with that. But when you've just completely lost your temper and yelled, you could beat yourself up, or you could say, I'm curious about that. I wonder what was going on for me. And it's likely that an answer won't come immediately. But if we sort of keep doing that, we keep on sort of inviting a kind of an inner conversation, we might be surprised about what comes up. So I really think the first step involves just being curious about our own process.
Lisa, you've created an online community for mothers, and I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about this community and what mothers can expect to experience in this group.
Sure. Well, I am in the process of creating it, so
Okay.
it's not quite finished yet. But there's going to be so I like to use fairy tales in my process, and there's a bunch of reasons for that. But one of the reasons is that I think fairy tales are beautiful, and I think they express really profound psychological truths in beautiful metaphorical language that's accessible and also fun. And I think that when we're looking at difficult emotions through the use of fairy tales, it helps us be more open and less judgmental. So when I work on ideas, I always like to try to find a way to talk about them that uses fairy tales, and that's going to be, a big part of this community. So there's going to be, for example, email courses that you can sign up for free. And those will involve just, a fairly short fairy tale and a little bit of interpretation and how that fits in with mothering. And then some questions that you can use, just to think about, or you can use them as journaling prompts to kind of dig into it a little bit more and make the story more applicable to your own life. And then I also plan on having some online virtual workshops for mothers where we can do a little bit more of this real time and also give women a chance to interact with each other around these ideas.
Lisa, I feel like this is such a exciting and needed resource for women, especially because it's just going in so deeply and really looking at these places where, we can get stuck with judging ourselves, feeling a lot of shame, and getting curious, like you said, and freeing up more of this energy so that it's moving towards creativity and possibilities versus feeling stuck and just not being able to navigate the motherhood experience in a way where you feel like you said, you don't feel like you're doing everything wrong.
Right. Well, and that beautiful quote from Jung, the right way to wholeness is full of fateful detours and wrong turnings.
Yes, that's a good one.
So, right. And I think, if we're relating to our experience with curiosity and consciousness arises from curiosity, then we almost kind of can't do it wrong,
Yeah.
because we will have been there, we will have been present, we will have been present to our children, and we will have been present to ourselves.
Yeah, so the curiosity piece is really something that kind of anchors you into that present moment. And I love how you also shared that it's very difficult to be judgy when you're being curious.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Lisa, what has surprised you most in your work around this topic?
When I started researching this topic and thinking about it and writing about it, I knew I wanted to use fairy tales. And I think what has been really satisfying and sort of delightfully surprising is how many fairy tales there are that treat these themes of motherhood. And I think it speaks to the universality of this experience and the universality not just of, actually being a mother, but of experiencing it as psychologically challenging to be a mother, but also experiencing it as something which helps us grow. And really, to use Jung's term, it's an individuation opportunity. It's a chance to become more whole and to grow into the person we were meant to be.
That's so beautiful to look at. It really ties in with, what you shared when we started our conversation about, how you unconsciously perceived motherhood to be prior to having your daughter. And really here it has opened up so much for you. And you've grown in ways that were not possible before you had children.
Absolutely. And I think, obviously there are many ways to be generative and to commit yourself to something. And I think most parents would say that they would not be the same person had they not had children.
Yes, I believe that is something most parents would say. I know I can say that. Yeah.
Yes.
Lisa, thank you so much for spending this time with me and sharing your insights, your wisdom, your work around this topic. I love the approach that you are taking with it through the use of fairy tales. When you were sharing the story of Tatterhood, it really did bring these aspects of motherhood and shadow and light. It really brought them forth very clearly, and it was easy to understand and connect with.
Well, I'm so glad. That's wonderful to hear. Thank you so much for inviting me on.
And Lisa, what is the best way for listeners to get in touch with you to learn more about your work?
Well, my personal blog is theyoungsoul.com, and that's Jung as in Jung. And the new website, which is going to be the community of moms, is motherhoodtransformation.com.
And we will include links to those websites in our show notes so that listeners can get in touch with you.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation with Lisa. As a mom, I found it incredibly validating, and Lisa's use of the Norwegian fairy tale Tatterhood to explain the dynamics of shadow and parenting was very helpful for me as well. Another aspect that stood out for me is that although shadow contains everything we would rather not know about ourselves, and the parts of ourselves that we view as unacceptable and keep hidden or reject, shadow also contains great riches and can provide access to gifts of energy and possibility available to us if we can be more open towards our shadow. Another piece that stood out for me is how Lisa described that one of the ways to begin working with shadow is to become curious, and that we can't be curious and judgmental at the same time. For show notes to today's episode, please visit www.lourdesviato.com/women-in-depth, where you will find links to the resources mentioned. And if you enjoyed today's podcast, please subscribe on iTunes or share with a friend. Again, thank you so much for listening, and see you next time.